Thank you for joining, Randy. You're the third guest, the third episode of In the Built Environment, and super excited to have you on, especially with your background in the Seabees. And yeah, I've enjoyed listening to your other podcasts, some of your other podcasts you've done, and would love to talk about your book too.
For sure. Let's do it.
Well, thank you for coming. And how did you find out about FM? So you started in the Seabees and kind of learned about it that way?
Yes. So, unlike many who usually say, "Oh, I fell into this thing," or my role kind of evolved into facilities management, for me, it was actually part of the gig. So, for those that don't know, Navy Seabees is the naval construction force. We're the Navy. The Navy has its own construction force. And there's kind of two facets to the Seabees. So there's the actual construction, right? So we go out and we do real deal construction. We build barracks, we build warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. Overseas, we can never build domestically in the United States, but we go overseas. And we do a lot of also like humanitarian type work. So we do a lot of water well drilling in underdeveloped countries. We build little schools in underdeveloped countries. We do a lot of that kind of thing, but we also do a lot of construction on overseas military bases. So like Okinawa, Japan, Guam, Spain, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's this other facet of the Navy Seabees, which is the maintenance. And that's where the facilities management piece comes into play. So everywhere we deploy, when we deploy overseas, we deploy to a Seabee camp. And that Seabee camp consists of multiple buildings. It's a campus, if you will. And that campus involves like the administration building, which is where all of our, the commanding officer, the executive officer, like the executive team, if you will, is in that administrative office. Then we have medical and dental clinics, right? So that way, if somebody gets hurt or whatever, they can go to that little medical dental clinic, get seen by the corpsman, get fixed up, go back to the project site, be on their merry way. We have the actual barracks where we sleep. We have a cafeteria, which we call a galley. So we have that. And then so within the Navy Seabees, I won't get too much into it, but there's jobs. And within those jobs, they fall into different companies. So we have like Alpha Company is all of our equipment operators and construction mechanics. So we have buildings where they basically have all of the heavy construction equipment, all the mechanical maintenance, I mean, all the fleet maintenance facilities, right, to maintain our construction equipment. So as you can see, these forward operating bases, if you will, that we deploy to are really like a small little public works, if you will. It has all these little, all these buildings that support our operations for the Naval Construction Mobile Construction Battalion. And so I always found myself in my CB career on that maintenance side. I did a couple construction projects here and there, but for the most part, I've always fell into that maintenance and construction side. And I started off in the trade, so a little background there. So in the military, when I first joined, I was a utilitiesman, and that's plumbing, HVAC, water treatment, sewage treatment. I like to say anything that flows through pipes, less electrons. So I didn't do a whole lot with like high voltage or electrical outside of HVAC, which has electrical, but I did a lot of plumbing and HVAC. And then as you progress in rank in the military, then you move into the, supervisory and management positions. So I eventually, made it to like maintenance manager, where I was overseeing all of the maintenance teams that maintained all these buildings. And that's really essentially kind of where the facility management piece came into play. But then I did a 3-year tour. I did a couple special programs in the Navy Seabees. And the one that really got me honed in on facilities management is when I was the facility operations chief for Bancroft Hall at the U.S. Naval Academy. So for those that don't know, Bancroft Hall is the dormitory for all of the U.S. Navy midshipmen. But it's more than just a dormitory, and it's really, you cannot put it into words. Just Google it if you want. But it's really, again, it kind of goes back to talking about a city. It had everything in there. We had indoor firing range, we had auditoriums, medical dental
Um,
facilities, all the administration offices, cafeterias, restaurants, stores, like all of that, plus the actual midshipmen's dormitory rooms. So
Wow.
I did that for 3 years, and that was when I realized, okay, I'm going to do facilities management when I get out. I just loved the day-to-day challenges, and no 2 days are ever the same type mentality that we have here. So that's kind of my journey. It was all stemmed from my background in the U.S. Navy Seabees.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hope we can. It seems like CB is transitioning to the construction side or facility side. I think they do it already, but it seems like something you said in one of the articles was we can help the corporate world understand that the CBs are a great talent source for
Yes,
FM.
for
Yeah,
sure. For sure. And I try to advocate on behalf of CBs as much as I possibly can. I'm always tagging CBs, hashtag CBs with all my posts to keep, because on the flip side, a lot of my fellow CBs a lot of times don't fully understand. Okay, so they understand facilities management, but it gets tricky when you talk about the firm that we work for, this outsourced,
mm,
corporate, and this is a key thing too, right? So we work for an outsourced corporate real estate services firm, which is different than the outsourced
mm,
facility services firms. So that's one of the key things that I talk to when I talk to anybody really who's interested in this industry, is talking out the difference between a corporate real estate services firm versus a facility services firm,
mm.
and the differences between the two, because there are differences. But going back to the CVs, a lot of times they just don't understand that aspect of it. So they're like, hey, I want to be an FM. I just don't know where I fit in into the corporate world. And then that's when I start explaining, look, a lot of companies are outsourcing their FM services. They just don't want that. They don't want to deal with that internally. They would rather just outsource it to a vendor and let them handle the day-to-day, I wouldn't say headaches necessarily, but the challenges of managing buildings,
Mhm.
so they can focus on their core business, whatever that core business may be. And once I explain that to the CVs, that I talk to or others, they start to get a better understanding. Okay, I have a better understanding of how this whole outsourcing thing works, and what these companies do and how they do it.
Love that. I wonder if you could also speak to, because I feel like people that are in HVAC or plumbing might not see a career path for themselves in FM, even though that could be a really good way to go.
For sure. So, but I want to be clear because I don't want to confuse. So yes, I think if we go back, many, many, many years ago, the old adage of the FM career path was you did start off in the trades. You started
Mm,
off as a building maintenance person, and your role evolved, and you evolved into being a facility manager. So way back in the day, a lot of facility managers had that strong
mm,
facility engineering background, but that's no longer the case, and it hasn't been the case in a very long time. But I think so. It really depends on the role, and then especially in the outsourced world that we are in, it really depends on the client and what they expect of their facility manager. And and so some clients say, no, I want my facility manager to be technically minded. I want them to have that background where they know how to speak the boiler room speak,
mm,
um, to explain what's happening with equipment. But a lot of times others are like, we just need people that understand, the budget, where the money's going, and then how to manage vendors. They don't necessarily need to have that technical background. But I do think having the technical background at times, again, it really just depends on the company or the client. It is advantageous.
mm,
Like when I work with my vendors and I build those relationships with my vendors, I will say, be it as it may, there is a certain connection. Once they find out, like especially my HVAC vendors, once they find out, oh, I ran a chiller plant and I was an HVAC technician, the relationship changes a little bit there. I say where they're like, oh, he's kind of one of us type of thing,
mm.
and then they also realize, good, bad, or indifferent, we can't really pull one over this guy's eyes, right?
Yeah.
if we're saying this needs to be done, this person is going to be the first one to say, wait a second, are you
Mhm.
absolutely sure that's what needs to be done, or can we check this first? But I try not to do that. I will be honest. It's been tough. Coming from the trades background, I try to not, get that knee deep into it, because for one, I haven't turned wrenches on HVAC equipment in years. HVAC equipment has changed a lot since I was in the field. So I do still try to trust my vendors, but there's certain things at times where I'm like, hang on, man, did you check this? Did you look at that? So I think it's advantageous in certain roles, but it really just depends again on the specific role. And I wouldn't say, you cannot be successful as an FM if you did not come from the trades. That is an absolute false narrative. Way back in the day, possibly, but today's day and age, not at all. Not at all. It's more about people and service and hospitality, which I think we're going to get to here in a minute.
Yeah, I love that. I think I want the listeners to like understand that, yeah, whether they come from a trades background or not, like you bring different types of FM experience. But I think like I met somebody at one of my internships who was in HVAC, and it seemed like he didn't really see a path forward in his career. Like he felt like he was kind of stuck. And I just wanted to help him open his eyes to you can go into the FM side too. There's a lot you can do
Right.
on the HVAC side. Like that is a viable career path. And
For
if you
sure.
want to, you can come to the FM side. Um, what have you loved most about your career, Randy?
So I would say this over and over again. It's that service to others. That's what we do as facility managers. We provide services to others. Everything that we do or possibly fail to do has a direct impact on those employees within the built environment. And that cannot really be understated enough. So coming from the military, a lot of veterans get out and they look for a profession where they can continue to serve. And sometimes they go into LEO, law enforcement. Sometimes they go into like a small, chamber of commerces, right? Where they're involved with their local communities. But I always say, hey, there's a great, huge service aspect to being a facility manager. And I have so many stories when I was a facility manager about that service and how I took care of an employee when something was going crazy. And I got so many stories on that, but it's really just about that service. And FM as a profession, over about the last, I would say maybe 6 to 8 years, the narrative has been changing to, we are in the hospitality industry. It's no longer just the folks that are in hotels and resorts. Like as a facility manager, you have to have that hospitality mindset. You have to know that you're there to support and to serve all of those people within the building that you're managing or buildings that you're managing. But as we know, it can get tricky, and there's some diplomacy involved because everybody's issue to them is the priority one issue for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not necessarily the case. So there is some art to, saying no without actually saying no, or not reacting to something immediately because you have something that's a much higher priority that you're addressing at that current moment in time. But you don't want to just blow them off, just like anybody in the hospitality industry. You don't want to just blow them off or make them feel like they've been ghosted or you're ignoring them. That's like all bad, right? So, but that's really what I've loved the most. And like I said, I have all kinds of different stories about helping employees with situations where something was happening within the built environment that they were in, and they, for a real quick example, I'm not going to get into the weeds, but it was a salesperson, had a huge tech sale pitch. It was all through video, and he goes into the room to do the video, and it's not working. None of the AV equipment is working. So he comes running to my desk, and he is like stressed. I've never seen this person stressed. And so I knew, number one, I knew something was wrong because this person was always emotionally intelligent, calm as a cucumber, freaking out. And I went in, it was a quick fix, got it up and running. And I mean, that was huge to that person in that moment in time. That was absolutely huge. And I, after it was all said and done, he came back later and was like, "Hey, thank you. Like, you don't realize how much stress I was and pressure I was under. And when I went in there and went to start the AV system and nothing was working, I just felt like my whole world came to a screeching halt because I had this huge, important sales pitch that I had to do. And you helped me through that. That is just that's the awesome part of our job, right? That's the awesome part. But you never get the thank yous, right? Um, Nobody ever just calls you out of the blue moon and says, "Hey, thanks for keeping all the toilet paper stocked in the bathrooms," right? You never,
Hmm.
you never get those calls. It's always when you do get a call or an email. I always say it's either something's broke, somebody wants something, or somebody needs something. That's it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the three deals.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Um, what advice would you give to somebody, whether they're in the military or not? Or maybe you have two different advice that you'd give to people, but if they're considering a career in FM, maybe they're just learning about it right now, or they're
Right,
looking to start it.
right. So going back to what I just said earlier, looking at yourself and taking self inventory of yourself. Are you fully understanding and prepared to work in a hospitality industry? This is not for everybody. Like it is not for everybody. You have to be good with people. You have to be good with relationship building, communication, strong communication skills. Because when you're managing a building, like some of my past buildings, we had the executive floor. So I was talking to the EAs for the CEO of our client, and those EAs like and chiefs of staff, don't fool yourselves. Those folks have a lot of power in their words as the chief of staff to a CEO. And when there's something going on with their built environment on the executive floor, and they ping you about it, like it's important. And so it's having that hospitality industry mindset, that service mindset that you are going to be, working with people. Like 95% of my day is just talking to people, whether it's employees, whether it's clients, whether it's third party vendors, whether it's my own team. Right now, I currently manage a field service organization nationwide. So I have all my field engineers, I have my regional managers, regional operations managers, and then all the other pieces, parts that come into running a outsourced account organization. So it's really about that. But then the other two, and these are kind of mantras that I just carried with me throughout my whole life: ABL and ABC. Always be learning, always be curious. So, especially in the built environment, with you know more and more buildings becoming smart buildings, bringing technology tools into how we manage buildings, being able to really look at energy use of buildings and see where we can make tweaks. Like, are we running our HVAC systems all through the night, or are we having nighttime setbacks? Is the nighttime setback actually working? Is the system working and the nighttime setback actually happening? I mean, I've seen that before where everybody thought we were doing nighttime setbacks. The BAS building automation system was, set up for it, but there was a glitch in the building automation system. So it was actually never doing, it was never happening.
Mm.
So I'm like, well, what the heck? We're not saving any energy at night when there's nobody in the building. Let's get this fixed. So, uh, and then just what everything happening in today's day and age with work from home, remote, kind of offices and cube farms, as we like to call it, are kind of going away and making the shift to hoteling, which you see a lot of now, where everybody just brings everything in a backpack. You plop down at a workstation, you do your work, and you go home. You bring everything back. It's like working from a Starbucks, right? You don't leave anything at Starbucks. You bring all your stuff with you. You plop down, you do your work, and then you leave. That's really what hoteling is. For those that may not have seen that or been exposed to that, it's just you don't have your own cubicle. You bring everything with you. And there's a lot of talk between that too, right? Because some people feel like when they do have their own little space or their own little cubicle, they can decorate it. They can bring in, maybe some indoor plants or have pictures of their family that keeps them motivated. and potentially has a positive impact to their productivity throughout the day. Whereas hoteling, you're just going in, you're plopping down at a space. There's no personalization to that space other than the company's branding colors. Um, so interesting. We get into colors, but I don't want to necessarily get into that. But there's a whole lot of science involved with colors and what colors do for a person's mood, and attitudes, and how it affects their productivity throughout the day. So yeah. So I would say always be learning, always be curious, and just know that this is a people industry. So you have to be good. You have to be good with people. All shapes, sizes, forms, personalities, right? You have to be good with people.
Yeah, it seems like people can be the hardest part of careers, but also the most fulfilling.
Yes, I agree.
Would you like to talk at all about, I either read or heard that you're a gardener and you love the biophilia part of FM?
Yeah. So yeah, I am a gardener. I do like to be outside. So biophilia sounds like a crazy fancy word, but really it's bringing the outdoors in, and there's a lot of different advantages to this. We know that there's a lot of certain indoor plants that actually act as natural air scrubbers that clean the air. So that's one aspect of it. But there is science backed. I don't have anything off the top of my head, but it is science backed. You can look it up that as humans, we are naturally connected to the outdoor environment. And I think anybody who has gone for a walk in the woods or by a river or to the ocean, how your attitude changes, right? Or your emotions change. It really brings a sense of calm. That's why a lot of people, like even myself, when I'm extremely stressed, I'll just step out and go for a walk, right? Just be out with nature. So this idea of biophilia is bringing the outdoors in. It's bringing plants. It's bringing those things that you see outside and just bringing them out inside into the building, into the built environment. And you see it a lot in like the common areas of facilities. So like your lobbies and stuff like that, you'll see a lot of green walls now where they have these plants that are growing out off the wall. And it helps to again maintain calmness, if you will, or try to keep people from getting overly stressed, because if you're constantly looking at plants or indoor waterfalls or fountains, it is calming. It really is. Like even if you think about when you go to a shopping mall and you're running around like a maniac shopping, but I know for me anyway, personally, when I see that fountain, sometimes it's just nice to just let's take a pause. Let's go sit by the fountain, listen to the water, and just kind of chill for 10, 15 minutes, right? So it just has a natural calming effect. And there's a lot of other benefits to biophilia, like I talked about with the plants and the natural air scrubbing, and so on and so forth. There's a lot to biophilia, trust me. But I love that idea, and it's been around now for quite a while. I think I don't know. I don't want to speak too much, but I know Google was a big embracer of biophilia way back when they were first starting to really build out their huge, massive facilities. So
Thanks for sharing. That's awesome. Yeah, I love having plants indoors and the sound of water.
yeah,
Would you like to talk about data centers, managing data centers, what that's like? Maybe people
yeah,
don't even know what data centers are, so
exactly.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we can. It just kind of evolves into some of the something else to talk about, right? So there's a lot of unique, dare I say, niche parts of being an FM or industries. So critical environments is one of them, and critical environments is more than just data centers. But we can speak. I can speak specifically. I'll speak specifically to data centers. But before we do, let's just talk about critical environments in general. So there is a difference, right? And this is one thing I do talk to people when they're interested in becoming a facility manager. I do tell them, okay, one thing you need to really think about, and you may never have thought about this until now, is what types of buildings do you want to be managing? Because that really plays into the operational tempo of your day. So if you're managing an office building, for the most part, not black and white, but for the most part, the employees come in Monday through Friday. between 8 or 9 a.m. They usually start leaving by 3 p.m., 4 p.m. And then in the evening, for the most part, the building is empty and you just have your roving security. So those types of facilities and buildings, the bulk of your day, your busyness of your day is going to be that 9 to 3:30, 4 o'clock. When you go home, yeah, you might get a call here and there from the roving security guard. Hey, I'm calling just to let you know that I walked past the pump room and I seen some water coming out from under the door. Just letting you know there's some water coming out from underneath the door. Oh, we might have a water leak, right? But for the most part, when you're managing office buildings, once you go home, you're pretty much it's until the next day. But then you have these other environments, which are hotels, hospitals, and data centers. And with one thing that a lot of people don't really speak to, but cultivation facilities for marijuana growth, right? So as marijuana has been legalized in more and more states for medicinal purposes or what have you, there's a lot of cultivation facilities going up all over the place. Those are critical environments because they have strict humidity and cooling requirements and power. Like you always have to have backup power because they're growing all this, this plant, and they can't afford to let that plant die if they lose power or if they lose cooling. So these are all critical environments. And what that means to a facility manager is now you are 24/7, 365. And that may not be everybody's cup of tea. But I know for me, as working in data centers, I have my phone all the time. When I go to bed at night, my phone is on my nightstand. Not everybody's cool with that, right? So that's where I explained, well, you just have to understand in facilities management in general, you should always have your phone on you, but especially in those critical environments where I always say nothing ever breaks at noon on a Monday. Things always go down at the worst, most inopportune time. You have to be able to get a hold of the security guards, whatever. They have to know that they can call you. You're going to respond and do what you got to do. So then let's talk about data centers, right? So data centers are just, it's insane what's happening with that industry, as we know, with AI and many, and let's not forget about crypto mining, cryptocurrency, crypto mining. Those data centers are just on a whole nother level. Not a whole lot of people talk about the cryptocurrency, crypto mining data centers, but those things are gigantic and they're just on a whole nother level. But with the data centers, as for I guess, let me take a pause. For those that may not know, a data center is a building. It could be a room, but most of the time it's a building that houses all of your IT equipment. So your servers, your switches, your and then your IT racks, right? And obviously this is all electronic equipment that puts off a whole heck of a lot of heat. And electronics does not like to be in hot environments. So there's a really high demand for cooling, and there's a high demand for power, especially with the new stuff coming in with AI and everything. The density of racks, I don't want to get too technical on this call, but the density of racks. So basically what that means is the power consumption of one IT rack. Back in the day, the power consumption of one IT rack was, maybe 3 to 9 kilowatts. And now these racks are becoming so dense, or to put it in layman's terms, they are being so stuffed with IT equipment in one singular rack that one singular rack now is up to, I think, 60 to 70 kilowatts of power that it's needing just to run one rack. And then when you talk about like these larger data centers, you have hundreds of these racks that are pulling this kind of power. So you can see how that just evolves into the power demand. And then again, because these racks have so much IT kit in them now, and they're so dense, the amount of heat now that's being produced that needs to be removed from that space is really getting crazy. And that's why you're getting into these new technologies where the liquid cooling, where they're basically now what they're doing is they're physically taking these servers, these IT racks, if you will, and they're submerging them in
Oh wow.
dielectric liquid, and they just sit in dielectric liquid, and that way the cooling is being done through the liquid instead of the more commonly known way, which is the air critical room air conditioners, right? The cold air using air to remove the heat. So there's just a lot of crazy stuff happening with data centers, and some people you'll hear it called DCEO, data center engineering and operations. But that's really what it is. It's all of that supporting infrastructure for the data centers, and that's your security systems, right? So these data centers are locked down, and it's really cool because the correlation to what I did with Department of State, diplomatic security, has really been beneficial in the data center industry because the security posture, right? The vehicle barrier systems, the man traps, the access control, the cameras, the surveillance, all of that you find in a data center is very similar to how our embassies are protected. Very similar infrastructure. So I've been able to make that correlation. Then you also have your fire protection systems, obviously very important to detect any possible fire before it actually becomes a fire in these data center environments, because of all of the electronic equipment and just the value. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars worth of equipment in these data centers. So you have your power, your cooling, fire suppression, security systems, the whole kit and caboodle is kind of what we look after as critical facility managers.
Thanks
That
for
was a
sharing
lot.
that.
That was a
Yeah,
lot,
no,
Jacob.
I think it's I think it's so cool though to learn about data centers. Like I didn't really know what they were, and somebody kind of helped me conceptualize it by saying, you know how you put stuff in the cloud? Well, it's not just some nebulous cloud out there, like it's a
Right.
place. There's a place
Exactly.
and it's called a data center.
Exactly.
And I also didn't realize like how much power you need and how like you have to think about the location of it in terms of how much power needs to be there
Yep.
and the humidity and like the temperature. So figuring out what places in the US and in the world have the fit those requirements or getting more power there so they can meet those requirements. There's a
Yes.
lot going on.
There is, and if anybody's been following, they know that is the number one talk of the town right now. There's we're kind of dare I say we're reaching this inflection point where we have all the data center development is probably out 8-10 years. Like people know where they're going to have data centers built 8 to 10 years from now, and they're realizing we don't have enough power. We don't have enough power to support all this development of data centers. Let alone you have also what's happening too is you have companies that had owned their own data centers, which is called enterprise data centers. So that's where a company owns and operates its own data center. And then they realized it's so costly to do that, like to manage a data center is super expensive. So they put their stuff in a cloud, right? So they moved all their stuff to a co-location operator, moved all their stuff to the cloud. But now with cloud services going through the cost of cloud services going really, really extremely expensive. There's some companies now that are going back to bringing their stuff in-house
Oh,
back to their, but now what they're looking at is they're like, okay, we want to bring it back to our enterprise data center, bring it back to in-house. But the problem is we know that the facility that we had it in before is just not adequate for what we need. So now you have that going on too, where they're repurposing, rebuilding, and all of this just adds to the power demand for that, that local power utility provider. And so yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That is what's happening right now, and there is a lot. That's a whole nother conversation. There's a lot of strategy involved with why, because some people are sitting back scratching their heads like, why are they building data centers there? Well, it's because that's where the power is right now. And then there's also tax incentives. So I know here in Chicago, there's a lot of big tax incentives if you choose to build your data center in here in Chicago. So Chicago, just up the road from me, I have two massive data center campuses. One has been there for a few years. The other one is still being built out. It's just crazy the amount of data center development activity that's taking place and expansions. I've seen data centers get expanded, adding 60 more megawatts to their site. It's just, yeah, it's mind-boggling. But now what's happening is they're going into areas where this is where it's getting to be a struggle with talent. So they're moving into areas now where there's a lot of power availability, but these areas tend to be a lot more rural.
Mm,
Uh, they're not in the big cities, right? And now the problem is they're building these data centers in these really kind of oddball locations that nobody really knows a whole heck of a lot about, and then they can't find the talent, the data center engineering and operations talent to maintain the power and the cooling and everything, because these sites are being built in such rural areas that the talent is just not there. Vice when you're building in a big city where you have a lot of facility engineering talent running around. That's the other piece of the pie that's becoming coming to a head as well, is just finding the talent for some of these locations where data centers are being built that are kind of not, I don't want to say they're not attractive. Every piece of America is beautiful in its own way, but there's a lot of folks that are just like, no, I prefer the city. I don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere. So that's starting to become interesting too.
yeah. I I think another thing that maybe people don't really grasp is what it means when it's like you literally can't have like any downtime. Like
Right.
that it has to be up and running all the time. And just like a tiny bit of downtime makes all the difference between how much people will pay for
Yep.
like a data center that never goes down. I mean, of course, there's the very, very small exception, but it's so small, like it's hard for people to conceptualize, I think. And how that relates to when you're doing projects at your data center, as I understand it, you have to like go through a lot of process to make sure every
Yes.
step of that's going to go well so that it doesn't go down.
Exactly. It's and that's a whole nother piece. Um, Project management, critical project management is becoming another kind of niche part of being a project manager, right? And I say this all the time. there is there is a huge difference between managing an office build out, or tearing some office walls down because they want to make it into an open collaborative hoteling space, versus doing some major infrastructure work in a live data center. You can't, it's not like you can just shut the data center down for 2 weeks
Right.
while you do this work. So having project managers that understand that, and understand that, yes, you're exactly right, process, procedures, everything has to be written out, and the narrative has to be understood by all, and having backup plans. If something does go wrong that was not anticipated, what's our backup plan? I mean, yes, it's it's crazy, but that's why there's a lot of certain types of veterans that succeed in this.
Mm,
Navy nuclear power folks, they understand the importance of data centers. That's why Navy nukes are highly sought after. There's other things like Army Prime Power, which is our generator experts. They understand the importance of maintaining power and keeping power running when you lose your utility powers. So yeah, there's just a lot involved. And I would say if anybody's interested to know more about, data center, critical facility management, what have you, feel free to reach out to me. I can be found on LinkedIn. But there's some good I'm a member of Infrastructure Masons. Infrastructure Masons is a nonprofit that talks about the whole digital infrastructure industry, and it's global. So you can look on their website and see what Infrastructure Masons is all about. For veterans, military veterans, you can join Infrastructure Masons for free.
wow.
And we actually just stood up this past year a job basically you put in what your experience is, what you did in the military, and it actually brings up here's the different jobs in a digital infrastructure industry that would be a match for your skill set. So that's helping to help bring veterans into this industry.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Do you want to
And
talk? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say I was going to flip to one last thing. I know that we've gone pretty long, but so getting away from the critical environments, another aspect of facilities management. I talked about these different kind of niches within facilities management. Another one that I don't think is spoken enough about is foreign service facility managers. So these are the folks that work with U.S. Department of State, and they manage the U.S. embassies worldwide. So if you are not only interested in facilities management and the built environment, but you also are interested in living overseas, seeing the world, traveling like crazy, foreign service facility managers are always in demand. And like I said, they basically oversee and manage the U.S. embassies worldwide. It's an awesome thing. And a lot of these U.S. embassies are gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous buildings, have a lot of LEED certifications to them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another aspect. And a lot of times you have to have a clearance. So keep that in mind. You have to be able to get a clearance, a federal security clearance. But being an FM in the foreign service is pretty cool. So when I did my last 5 years in the Navy Seabees, I was on special programs with Department of State Diplomatic Security, where we did all the security systems. But there were times that I was, working in partnership with those local facility managers for the embassy as well. And it's just a cool gig if you're interested in facilities management, but you want to also see the world. It's really like very similar to the military. So they'll get posted to an embassy for 2 or 3 years, then they get moved to somewhere else, and then they get moved to somewhere else. So about every 2 to 3 years, you're living in a different country, you're managing different buildings, different embassies. So yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, and I've heard they're really looking for people like they're on a huge hiring thing right now. And I've heard also, well, I've looked into it a bit because that's really interested me too. And at least when I had looked into it, you start at like $75,000 a year,
Yeah,
but also your housing is paid for. Like it's a
exactly.
pretty amazing gig.
And you get locality pay. Yes, it is a good gig. The housing is pretty darn nice. It really depends on where you go, right? So I will be honest, right? So some of these areas, where we have embassies, they're not really the best countries. So I think the Department of State looks at it as, okay, we're putting you here. It's not the best country, so the least we can do is give you this
Mhm.
grandiose place to live. So when I was in the Seabees, I mean, I had one of my Seabees, I forgot where he was, but he had his own swimming pool,
Wow.
just a massive place that he was living. He was like, Randy, this is crazy. I can't believe I'm living in this place for the next 3 years with my wife and kids. For me in Germany, because it was Germany, come on, it's Europe. How can I complain? So ours were apartments. So it was nice. They were still nice, but it wasn't like
Mhm.
this huge fancy thing. It was apartments. But it
Mhm.
was still, I mean, I was in Europe. How could I complain? And
Mhm.
we traveled about 85%. We covered all of Eurasia.
Wow.
I've seen so many different countries. I don't even remember half of them anymore. But we go to Prague and Paris and Brussels and all over doing diplomatic security, work. And then I would just take the family with, and be like, hey, I got to go to Paris for 4 days. You guys want to tag along? And I would just do my job during the day, do the work, get it done, and then we would meet up at night. So just that's a cool, but you got to like to travel. That's
Yeah.
the biggest thing. And even though you're at a location with an embassy, you also have other locations that you have to travel to that have facilities that you have to maintain. So
Oh, I didn't realize that.
yeah. So it's like in Frankfurt, I'm not gonna say too much, but you have
Yeah.
Frankfurt, but we also had other sites all throughout Germany, and that
Mhm.
facility manager out of Frankfurt had to go to those other sites, on a quarterly basis or whatever, just to check in, make sure everything is, which is very similar to a facility manager here in the States who's managing a regional portfolio. You kind of
Mhm.
travel to your buildings once a quarter, check in. Hey, anything I
Mhm.
need to know about? Anything going on that I don't know about, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, good gig though. Very good
Yeah,
gig.
and it seems like it's a way, kind of like the military, like to be able to kind of accelerate your career because you get put in a leadership position so quickly.
Yes, for sure.
Love that. Do you want to talk at all about the credentials you earned through, I don't remember the data center organization, but
Yeah,
that one at IFMA?
yeah, for sure. So, I got both of them now. So I'll start off with FMP. So FMP is Facility Management Professional, and that is given by IFMA, International Facilities Management Association. Been around forever. So you have Facility Management Professional. I got that credential, and that's really a general overview of facilities management. And I don't remember how many different topic areas they are. So I earned the FMP, and thanks to my current firm, who has a
Mhm.
partnership with IFMA, I was able to get that FMP. So that was pretty cool. And then since I made this move into data centers, DCD Academy, which is based in the UK, based in London, DCD Academy offers credentialing for data center professionals. So I have my DCP, which is starting to become more known in North America. It's more known in Europe because that's where their heavy presence is. But basically, it's data center practitioner. It's very technical. I'm not going to lie. Some of the sections kind of kicked my butt. I'm not going to lie. It's very technical, but it really covers all of the data center, what we just talked about earlier, the cooling, the power, the fire suppression systems. And then it also talks about the design of a data center, like the whole kit and caboodle from site selection to build out to maintain and operating to eventually decommissioning and taking it away. The kind of whole kind of overview of a life cycle of a data center is what the data center
Wow.
practitioner course is, and that was cool because those courses were done virtually, but they were live. It was
Mhm.
I want to say it was 6 days, and each session I think was 4 hours long. If I remember right, I think it was like from eight. I think I was going like from 8 in the morning to noon, Monday through
Mhm.
Friday or something. But it was intense, man. It was intense, but it was a good credential to get. So DCD Academy, you can look them up online as well. They offer data center practitioner. They have a ton of other um, credentials as well. And then I will, to be fair, there's others out there that offer data center credentialing. So I don't know all of them, but I will mention CNET. CNET is the one that has the bigger market share in the United States. So a lot more people know about CNET's credentials for data centers than they necessarily do with DCD Academy here in the United States. So CNET is another one that offers data center credentialing training and programs too. So you can look at either one of them and see which one suits your fancy and go with it. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention CNET as well as another data center credentialing agency. But really for facilities management, it's IFMA. There used to be Pro FM, but I think Pro FM has been disestablished now. So I think it's really just IFMA. But I will say this is where people get confused too. I don't want to get too much into this, but you also have BOMA, Building
Mhm.
Owners
And
and,
Managers
and
Association,
Management
I think.
Association. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Woo.
No, no, you're
So
good.
BOMA is for property managers. IFMA is for facility managers. So I will try to keep this white and brief. What's the difference? The difference is a property manager works for the building owner. A facility manager works for the tenants of the building. If that makes sense, I don't know. But
Mhm.
if you think about a building, you have a high rise building. We all know that these high rise buildings, for the most part, are leased by different companies, different tenants. They have multiple different tenants. You have company A is leasing floor one, company B is leasing floor two, blah, 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 blah. So you got the owner of that property. The main objective of that owner of that property is to maintain at least like a 95 to 98% occupancy rate because he's getting all of those lease payments in. So then, that's how they're making money. So
Yeah.
a property manager is responsible to attract and retain tenants. So you don't want tenants coming in and at the end of their lease, they're hightailing it out because the building was falling apart. They weren't getting the services they need. They didn't have the amenities that they thought they would get. So a property manager really focuses on the amenities, right? Does the building have on-site daycare? Does it have on-site fitness center? Does it have on-site restaurant? All of these things that will attract tenants and attract companies to say, yeah, I want my employees to work for that building because you have all these nice amenities. So that's kind of what a property manager does. And then a facility manager is the ones that are looking after, they work for that company who is leasing floor 1 and 2. And so they're looking after that and they're nurturing that landlord relationship, right? So when there's something that goes down in that space that actually is the landlord's responsibility or the property manager's responsibility, not the company's responsibility, they manage those relationships to say, hey, we need you to come in. That gets really confusing. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but if anybody wants to know more about that, I'm happy to jump on the line. But that's the difference between IFMA and BOMA. BOMA is really targeted for property managers. IFMA is targeted for facility managers.
Yeah, love that. And it seems like BOMA kind of bridges the gap too in some ways because they have the RPA and the FMA. So you can kind of like learn about both through them. And then there's IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management, that has like more focus on like residential and commercial property management. Yeah, and then IFMA's focused on the facilities management side. Love that. Thanks for explaining that. I didn't understand it at first when I started looking into the course. I was like, I really don't get what the difference is. So yeah, I think if people want to understand that, talking with you would be super helpful for them to understand that. Would you like
there is
to?
overlap,
Yeah.
There is overlap. That's where people get tripped up. I mean, there is overlap because it's all about managing the built environment. At the end of the day, if that property manager is, the swimming pool is, the water's always cold, the heat doesn't work, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Yeah, and depending on the buildings, like you could be in one building and the facility manager could be responsible for one thing, and in a different building, that's the property manager's responsibility, depending on the lease. So
exactly. That's where things get really confusing.
Yeah. But I think the good way to do it is what you said, like the property manager works for the owner, facilities manager works for the tenant. The responsibilities may vary, but those things stay the same.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about your book that you wrote?
Yeah, sure. I guess we can maybe close on that.
That
so
sounds great.
I wrote a book. It took me 15 months of writing and editing and re-editing and rewriting. So it is available on Amazon. I wrote it. I self-published it myself using Kindle Direct Publishing. So it's available on Amazon. It's called In Service to Others, a U.S. Navy Seabee's Journey. So the whole basis for me writing a book was basically, as veterans, we get into conversations with people, and a lot of times the conversation goes something like, oh yeah, my grandfather or my grandmother or somebody in my family served. And of course, as veterans, we're like, oh, did they? Awesome. What did they do? What service were they in? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, I don't really know. They never really talked about it. I think they might have been in the Army, but I don't really know. Oh, what did they do? I don't know. I know that they were in the Korean War. That's all I know. So I'm always like, man, what a missed opportunity, right? Because once that veteran passes on, their family is never really going to know what they did. So I was like, I'm gonna put my story into writing and put it into a book for my family. So all those future grandkids that aren't in this world yet, they're all gonna know what grandpa, great grandpa, great great grandpa did while he was in U.S. Navy Seabees. So that was really the basis of writing the book, is just to put into writing my personal military narrative. But then I also intermingled leadership, transition to corporate life for a lot of my sisters and brothers who struggle with that. So I do a whole chapter on just that transition and my own trials and tribulations with transitioning from the military to corporate world, and just some general life lessons, that we pick up over time. But yeah, that's the basis of the book. It's not a heavy read. I didn't want it to be a heavy read. Some military folks put out memoirs that are like over 1,000 pages. They're like 2 inches thick. I don't think anybody reads those books cover to cover. I wanted something that was not too short, not too long, easily transportable, so somebody could read it as they're on an airplane flying to somewhere. So if you're an avid reader, you'll probably get it done in a day or two. But it's just a good, nice book. And one thing that I always say is every veteran has their own unique story. And there's a lot still to this day for various reasons. There's still a lot of stereotypes, and you're a veteran, you went to war. No, not actually. Even with GWAT, there's still, when you look at the military as a whole, it's a very small percentage of the military actually see combat. But there's so many other things we do, and my career was really a lot of humanitarian disaster recovery, which is where I believe I really got that strong sense of service to others, and how that paralleled into my career now in facilities. So I talk about my two humanitarian missions in the book. Talk about a little bit about my upbringing, which was not the Brady Bunch. I'll be the first to say my upbringing was not the Brady Bunch. So I just let people know that, hey, you're the maker of your own story. Don't get caught up too much on your past. Just look to the future. Be kind to others. Don't be a jerk. And just be blessed to be around people and learn from others. Just like I learned from you, Jacob, in just the few short conversations we've had working up to this podcast. I've really appreciated learning a little bit more about you and your story. We all have our stories. So last thing I'll say is, if you ever thought about writing a book, anybody out there who's listening to this, if you ever thought about writing a book, man, just do it. Just start writing. It will evolve. It will come over time. It's not going to happen overnight. But man, if you ever thought about it, just start doing it. That's all I did. I just started writing, and 15 months later, I'm putting out a book.
Thank you so much for sharing, Randy. I love the humanitarian aid part of the Seabees. I looked into Civil Engineering Corps of Engineers, which is a super cool thing for people to look
Yeah.
into too. They have a great collegiate program where they contribute to your degree, and you're technically already starting your years of service in the Navy, but you're able to just focus on working towards your degree and not need to worry about the finances as much, which is awesome.
Right.
And that's open to people that are either getting an accredited architecture degree or an accredited civil engineering degree, or maybe other engineering too.
Any
And
engineering. Yeah, any
yeah,
engineering discipline.
yeah. And I'm super excited to read your book. I got a little bit into it, like I was starting it, but yeah, I'm really excited to read it. I'll include a link in the description below the video for people that are interested. And
Awesome.
yeah, just it was a joy to have you on, Randy. Thank you so much.
Yes, you too. Have a blessed day.